Hello, Taylor Elwood here, and welcome to the Sacred Masculine Quest. Today, I want to talk about the topic of the Me Too movement, which, a few years ago, in 2018, there was a drive toward, this woman put out the hashtag Me Too, and then her name was. I'm just looking at this book because I remember her name. Well, yeah, I shouldn't say that because I'm obviously Tarana Burke put it out there, and then there were other women as well who started to share their own Me Too experiences using the hashtag of Me Too. I recently finished reading this book called The Little Me Too Book for Men, and it talks about why this is so important to understand. Why it's important to understand the need to end men's silence on the Me Too, on sexual assault in relationship to Me Too. And I read this book and I was powerfully affected by it. It really made me think a lot about my own experiences growing up as a man, and how sometimes I've been silent. I have spoken up for different causes before, but sometimes I've been silent as well. And I've kind of let that silence be there because I didn't feel comfortable. I questioned, what else is going to be asked of me. And part of me sometimes even said, this isn't my business. It doesn't matter. But the thing is as men, we're called upon to do our work, the work to heal ourselves. But we're also called to do the work to acknowledge and take responsibility for what men collectively have done through history because of patriarchal values. Now, I want to acknowledge first, I want to also point out first and foremost that patriarchal values have hurt everyone. They've definitely hurt men. They've definitely hurt women. They've definitely hurt other gendered people, and they've hurt culture and society. There are very few people that patriarchal values benefit, and the people that it benefits are definitely doing their best to maintain and hold power. I mean, we see that with the recent elevation of Mike Johnson, the the Republican leader of the House right now, who holds some very alarming views on a number of topics that the people should be concerned about. This is a man who would definitely be more than happy to establish a society like Gilead from The Handmaid's Tale. He thinks that Christian values play an integral role in the way this country is run, and that's not really true at all. But it's a scary thing to see. Now, in general, I don't talk a lot about politics on here, and there's or in general, and there's a reason for that. I find that the people's politics are going to be what they are. I'm not going to necessarily get them to agree with my perspective. I feel like the best choice I can make is to vote and to take action in whatever way I can to support the causes I believe in. But sometimes it does mean making your voice heard. And as I read this book, the Little Me Too book, it made me realize that yes, I'm a white man. Yes, I have a lot of privilege. And yes, sometimes I just do need to be quiet and make the space to listen to what somebody else who comes from a less privileged background or experience or situation has to say. But sometimes I also need to make my voice heard. And for me, the Me Too movement is kind of a personal one. I mean, I've been sexually assaulted. I've been sexually assaulted by two different family members in my life. And I've been sexually assaulted by another man as well, outside of the family members in my life. And these experiences have definitely shaped the way that I interact with other people. But I've also sometimes been someone who has engaged in behavior that I'm not proud of. I've done things where like I was being too flirtatious in a professional setting, for example, or acting in a way that was inappropriate. And at the time, I didn't necessarily think anything of it. I went through some trainings around sexual harassment, and and the chief takeaway I got was don't do that behavior again. Okay. But I didn't always know that but I don't feel like I really understood why. I got a better inkling of it as I got older and as I became more empathetic and aware of what the women in my life would tell me, and occasionally what other men would tell me. Men, you'll find in general, don't talk about sexual assault. I mean, for a man to admit that he's been raped, yes, I've been raped. For a man to admit that he's been molested or anything along those lines, it's often seen as, well, you weren't enough of a man to keep, you're basically weak. And that's not really the case. I mean, a lot of times if you're a 10-year-old boy, you're not going to be strong enough to, but even if you are strong enough, sometimes you're going to have situations come up where people will do things to you, or you'll do things to yourself. So I mean, you got to keep that in mind. I mean, I even say this as someone who is in a marriage where sometimes I had sex with my second ex-wife when I didn't want to have sex with her, but I did it to keep her quiet. I did it to make her happy. I did it because otherwise we'd get into a conflict about sex, and I would feel like I kind of had to put out. And I say that not to, and I say that not to take away from the Me Too movement. I say that because I think men also need to recognize and own and acknowledge where they have their own Me Too experiences. I think when we do that, we are able to empathize more with what women in general go through. And I don't think that men in general fully know what women go through. I mean, I can speak to the fact that yes, I have been sexually objectified before in the past. I've had that experience a few times. I can speak to success objectification, where I've been objectified on the basis of the success that I've, seem to have. But I think that a lot of times we don't fully recognize or acknowledge that men in general, don't get it in the same way. And even when they do get it, a lot of times if they put on a certain front, they don't have to worry about the same experience. If they don't say, yeah, I've been raped, or yeah, I've had this experience, they don't have to really worry about it. And they also don't have to deal with certain experiences that women have to deal with every day, because women are treated as objects of desire. Like, how many times have you gone and you've seen a woman walking along and you've checked her out? I'm not saying women don't check out men, because I've definitely seen that happen as well. But if you go and you start saying things like, start catcalling her, or you start flirting with her and she's clearly not interested, or you do other things that you really shouldn't be, other actions that you really shouldn't be doing, that's where it becomes an example of like you're basically perpetuating the patriarchal values that say that you can treat a woman as as a sex object, that she can be treated a certain way. And I think that that's not a healthy thing for any man to be doing. And as someone who has sometimes done that behavior, not in recent years, not for a long time, but someone who has done that in the past, I can say and acknowledge that I look back on my younger self, and I do this with forgiveness. I just say, you didn't know better. You were raised in an environment where, in a lot of ways, you perpetuated the particular values that you learned, and you didn't know better at the time. But I do know better now, and eventually I learned. I learned, and I learned in the way where I went from unconscious incompetence to maybe conscious incompetence. So, for example, I learned that, okay, I really shouldn't be flirting with people in this context. That's not a good idea. That can create problems. But I was still thinking of it as, that'll create problems for me. I wasn't thinking of it as, that'll create problems, that's creating problems for somebody else, who doesn't want my attention and is feeling put into a situation where they're having to, defend themselves from my attention. I didn't figure that out until later on. And then at a certain point, I did figure it out because of conversations that I had with different women in my life who helped me to start seeing and recognizing behaviors that I had taken for granted, behaviors that I'd grown up with. Behaviors such as locker room talk, or listen to a guy make a joke about a woman, or something along those lines, or men just openly talking about like a woman that they wanted to sleep with, or whatever else. And I eventually came to realize, like, these behaviors are not healthy behaviors for anyone. They're certainly not healthy behaviors for me. And these are the kinds of conversations that men need to be having around this concept of Me Too. So, for example, for this book, I actually recommended it to my men's group, and we're going to be talking about it because I think it's really important to recognize and acknowledge those situations where I have, like in my case, where I have done that kind of behavior. And I want to hear stories from other men where they recognize, well, yeah, this is the way I objectified a woman, or this is the way that I put a woman on the spot, or something else along those lines. Because I think it's important to own that and take responsibility for it. And I'm not saying that you should never flirt or that you should never show interest. I mean, obviously, there is a proper time and a place, and sometimes it's a matter of gauging interest as well, taking your time. I think one of the key lessons that I learned over the years is just slow down. If I was interested in someone, one time I would be super like in their face, and I can be a very intense person. So even now, but what I learned is, okay, take a step back, relax, chill. You don't have to be in their face about, your interest in them. You can step back and just be appreciative, and maybe gauge their interest, get to know them a bit, find out who they are. It's interesting too because I recently had been watching a series of videos from, I guess, what you would call like a pickup artist. I've been exposing myself to all the different levels of masculine work, and I see some positive benefits of the men's work, and I see some places where it's a bit more toxic. And I was watching some of these pickup videos, and some of them made some great points about how you should act toward a woman and things like that. But some of them were kind of like, well, like if this is your goal and you're trying to get X from this woman, this is what you need to do. And I get why men do it. I mean, we are driven by our sexual drives, but we're also driven by the patriarchal values that have been put upon our sexual drives. The idea that you have to prove yourself as a man, the idea that you have to be sexually virile, the idea that you have to be hard and ready to go. And the sadness of that is that actually that is harmful for men as well. How many men have felt pressure to be sexual when maybe they didn't want to be sexual? How many men have tried to put themselves into a situation where they've maybe forced themselves to have sex, but they didn't want to, but they're afraid of what their woman will say or what other people will say. These are things that we all need to be thinking about. These are conversations we need to be having. They're not easy conversations. In fact, they're really hard conversations to have. But if we as men don't do this kind of work, we're continuing to perpetuate that silence, and we're perpetuating a world where women have their reproductive rights taken away from them. Women and their say over their bodies is dictated by some white man who says, this is what you should believe and this is what you should do. When we live in that kind of world, and we're living in that world right now. We had the Supreme Court justices take away the right to abortion on a nationwide front. And so now, and we even have in the current political situation, a bunch of military holds put into place by a coach from Alabama who thinks that he has the right to basically essentially tell the military that they can or can't give members the right to go and get an abortion across state lines where they might need it. And these men will say that they're motivated by standing up for the unborn and everything else. But once those unborn are born, do those men care? Do they care when that poor woman who has 5 kids and needs food stamps and all that? No, they're like, no, you should lift yourself up by the straps and somehow do better. And then they might even say, well, it was your choice. Yes, and then you took away my choice to do something about this situation that maybe I wanted to take. There's a hypocrisy in that kind of a movement. And as men, we need to really examine that hypocrisy and call it out and recognize that we are privileged because we don't have someone telling us that we have to have kids. We don't have someone telling us that they can deny the right to a vasectomy, for example. And although a lot of men don't like to get vasectomies, honestly, if you think about how intrusive it is for a woman to get her body altered in some form or manner, that basically if she doesn't want to have kids, she's got to have someone go inside her body much more intrusively and in depth than what a man has to experience. Then again, you have another thing coming. Like that's an experience men really don't get. A man might have to limp for a couple days and be in pain for a little bit, but it's not the same thing as what a woman has to go through in order to make sure she never has kids. And it's not the same thing because women will get challenged. Are you sure you want to do this? And won't be able to do it until their 30s or their 40s most of the time. But men, I could get a vasectomy like when I was in my 20s. Nobody challenged me about it. Nobody said, "Oh, are you sure?" Nope. It was like, "Yeah, go ahead and do that if that's what you want." So there's still a standard. And really, more so than ever, there's a double standard in place. And that's why reading a book like the Little Me Too book for men is so important. Because we have to be willing to examine our role as men in this experience. And even if you're a man who's like, I've never harassed a woman, well, great, good on you. That's great. You're a very rare exception if that's the case. But that still doesn't mean that you should stay silent. It means that you should speak up. And if you're a man who has harassed a woman, who's made a comment where it was unwelcomed and things like that, okay, you're not all that different from most men. But that doesn't make that a good thing. It just makes it appalling in a way. It's like, okay, well, that's the kind of behavior that's out there, and boys will be boys. Well, let's stop that. Let's change that behavior. Let's teach boys to be respectful and kind and loving and considerate. Let's teach boys to care about themselves as well and to speak up when they've been traumatized and raped and molested. Because if we call out these kinds of behaviors in general, this is what helps us transform our world and make it a better place. So I just wanted to share that thought. Reading this book was very powerful for me. It moved me in a lot of ways. And I think it's really important to call these things out and to recognize, the behaviors. And I know, speaking for myself, that yes, as a man, I'm proud of my journey and the fact that I've come a long, long way, and I've become a better man, and that I'm no longer engaged in toxic behaviors. And if there are toxic behaviors I'm engaged in, I'm actively working on them. But I also admit there's an element of shame there, and there's an element of sadness and regret. I wish that I could have told my younger self, "Hey, don't do that." It is what it is. And I can't change that. But what I can do is continue to call out this behavior. I can call out, this kind of the importance of doing this work. And I can also say that, like, this is why we need to do this work. We need to change the narrative in our world. We need to, as best as possible, make things better. And by making things better, I don't mean fixing the problem. I just mean that we take a step forward by acknowledging what women collectively have gone through. And we take a step forward and we acknowledge what queer people have collectively gone through, or what other gendered people, or what people of race of a different color of skin have gone through. We acknowledge the challenges that many of us, certainly speaking as a middle class white man, that many of us don't face. Or if we do face, we probably have a better chance of getting out of it because of our skin color and our gender identity and all the other things that we end up, bringing that we have brought to the table for us. This is important work. It's work that is part of the men's work. Yes, we need to work on ourselves. Yes, we need to own and acknowledge our work, but we also need to carry it forward, both And both in teaching our children how to be better, but also teaching ourselves how to be better, and then showing up in the world around us and being better for the people that are involved. And that can come in many different forms, but the important thing is that it comes in some form or manner in order to transform the world. All right, thanks for watching. And if you have any, feel free to like. If you have any comments, feel free to share them. And let's go out there and do this work and make our world a better place.